So as I was saying, epidermis is made up of 4 layers and 5 layers for thick skin only. But just before I go to that, I'm just going to come back to this epidermis, dermis and subcutis, because this part I got wrong. So cells in the epidermis, cells here in the epidermis are very close together, and therefore they stain intensively, whereas tissue and the cells in the dermis are much looser and further apart, so they stain less intensively. Whereas in the subcutis, the fat doesn't stain at all, so there's round bits in the subcutis. So there's fat here in the subcutis. The fat doesn't stain at all, and that's what gives the round bits in the subcutis. Cool. So as we go, you see epidermis, dermis, subcutis again is so important. We're going to take a zoom up of the epidermis. We're going to take a zoom. Okay, so it's made up of 4 layers and 5 layers for thick skin only, as I said. I'm going to go through these 4 layers. Okay, so number 1, this layer, number 1 is called the stratum basale. Stratum basal, whatever. It's the bottom layer. It's made up of stem cells that divide and push upwards. So here we have stem cells that divide and push upwards, and as they move upwards, they get flattened. Okay, so here, stem cells, these are stem cells. These are stem cells that divide, and as they divide and move upwards, they get flattened. Okay, so these stem cells divide, move upwards, and they get flattened. And what happens when they get flattened? They turn into these cells, as seen on number 2, and these cells are called stratum spinosum. Okay, I'm just going back to stratum basale, they're on the top of the dermis, okay, minor anyway, but anyway, moving on, go back to the stratum spinosum. So the stratum spinosum is the middle layer, yeah, so here is our stratum spinosum. It is the middle layer. It's called the stratum spinosum as they look spiny. You can see they look spiny, okay? And the reason they look spiny is because they have desmosomes, alright? The reason they look spiny is because they have desmosomes. Know that. They look spiny because they have desmosomes, okay? Desmosomes hold the cytoskeleton together. Desmosomes hold cytoskeleton of the cells together, okay? So the desmosomes hold the cytoskeleton of these cells together, yeah? And this causes them to be very strong and creates very strong cell adhesion, which is why they are why skin is a good barrier. Okay, so stratum spinosum, they are spiny as they have lots. They're spiny as they have lots of desmosomes. They're spiny because they have lots of desmosomes. They're spiny because they have lots of desmosomes. Yeah, they hold the cytoskeleton of the cell together. That's what desmosomes are. So they look spiny because they have lots of desmosomes. Desmosomes hold the cytoskeleton of the cells together, and this is why they're very strong, and why this is why this layer is very strong, and why the skin is a good barrier. And then move on to the next layer. The next layer, I've seen number 3, is called the stratum granulosum. And you're probably thinking, oh my god, there's too many things to remember. Easy mnemonic is BSG, not PSG. On that team, it's all about BSG, yeah? BSGC, BSGC, so BSG club, okay? I'm going to go back onto that anyway. So the stratum granulosum is the next layer. There are two things in these granular cells. 2 things. Number 1 is the keratohyalin granules. So these are precursors to keratin. So keratohyalin granules, these are precursors to keratin. The second thing is lamellar bodies, which are full of lipids. So there's 2 things in these stratum granulosum cells. Keratohyalin granules, these are a precursor to keratin. Keratohyalin granules, precursor to keratin, and also lamellar bodies, which are full of lipids. Cool? So both of these are needed to make the stratum corneum, which is the top layer now. Here is the stratum corneum. So that was stratum granulosum, the orange one. Now we go into the pink one, stratum corneum. Stratum corneum, this is the top layer. So let's let the camera focus. Here we are, the top layer. They're keratin-packed, dead anucleated cells. These are keratin-packed, dead anucleated cells. So the skin is oily and soft because of soft keratin. Nails and hair is because of hard keratin. So again, stratum corneum, they're keratin-packed dead anucleated cells. Keratin-packed dead anucleated cells. The skin is made up of soft keratin. Nails' hair is made up of hard keratin. The bricks are the dead cells packed with keratin from keratohyaline granules. So dead cells are packed with. The bricks are dead cells packed with keratin. The mortar are the lipids from the lamellar bodies. Simple, yeah. Okay, so I'll just go through very quickly. BSG, stratum basale, stem cells, stratum spinosum, desmosomes, most important things, the stratum granulosum, two things here, keratohyaline granules and lamellar bodies, and stratum corneum, these are keratin-packed dead anucleated cells. Cool? Now we move on to the fifth layer. So as we said, there's 4 layers and 5 layers for thick skin only. What's the fifth layer? And you really don't need to know this. This is minor. Anyway, stratum lucidium, the top layer for the skin. They're the top layer for thick skin only. So stratum lucidium, top layer for thick skin only. Thick skin has an extra layer between this. So the thick skin has an extra layer between the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum. It contains immature keratin only. Okay. So stratum lucidium is a top layer for thick skin only. Thick skin has an extra layer between the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum, and it contains immature keratin only. So the stratum lucidium is one of the top layers. It makes up the top layer of thick skin only. Okay, it's in the thick skin has extra layer. So the thick skin has an extra layer between the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum. So thick skin has an extra layer here, yeah, and called the stratum lucidium. This is very minor. Anyway, we'll move on. So there are other important cells in the epidermis. So here, this is our epidermis, yeah. This is our close-up epidermis, our close-up zoom, okay. And now there's other important cells in the epidermis. So we'll go through them quickly. Number 1, melanocytes. So these melanocytes, they allow pigmentation. The melanocytes release melanin, which is taken up by surrounding cells. The rate at which it's processed determines the color of skin. Okay, the reason why there's so many different color skins is due to whether you have eumelanin or none, and vitiligo is a loss of melanocytes, change in pigmentation. Just like my brother Ali has a bit of vitiligo. Anyway, Langerhans cells, immune cells which act as antigen presenting cells. So Langerhans cells, immune cells which act as antigen presenting cells, and also Merkel cells. These are sensory cells associated with nerve endings. Sensory cells associated with nerve endings. We go through them quickly. So melanocytes allow pigmentation. Melanocytes release melanin, which are taken up by surrounding cells. The rate at which this melanin is processed determines colour of skin. Reason why there's so many colours, due to eumelanin, vitiligo is a loss of melanocytes. Cool? So next, Langerhans cells, the immune cells, which act as antigen-presenting cells, and Merkel cells, which are sensory cells associated with nerve endings. Cool? Okay. So just quick time. Also, this is something that's very important. This is how epidermis gets its nutrients and blood supply. So as you see here, here's our epidermis. The epidermis doesn't have any blood vessels going through it. Epidermis has no supply. So there's these things called the dermal papilla. Okay, so the dermal papilla allow the epidermis to get access to nutrients and blood vessels from blood vessels in the dermis. So dermal papilla allow the epidermis to access nutrients from blood vessels in the dermis. So this is our epidermis. This is our dermis. This is our dermal papilla. There are blood vessels flowing here and flowing through around these dermal papilla. There are no blood vessels in the epidermis. So these dermal papilla allow nutrients basically to cross into the epidermis, as blood flow will flow here through the dermis, and the dermal papilla will allow easy access of nutrients into the epidermis. Dermal papilla allows epidermis to access nutrients from blood vessels in the dermis. Okay, and why wet skin goes wrinkly? So the stratum corneum, as we go back, this is the stratum corneum. Stratum corneum is the top layer. Yeah, stratum corneum, okay. The stratum corneum absorbs lots of water. Therefore, it swells up and ripples as the layers below stay the same. Stratum corneum is able to absorb lots of water, and therefore it swells and ripples as the layers below stay the same. Cool. Now we'll move on to the next page. Okay. What is a friction blister? They're a type of watery blisters. Occurs on the top layer of this as the skin rubs against the bottom layer of the skin, or the stratum corneum rubs on the stratum basale. So the stratum corneum, which is the top layer, rubs on the stratum basale, which is the bottom layer. This causes the spiny cells or the stratum spinosum to get crushed and leak its contents. If it's leaking its contents, well, its contents are proteins, maybe sugars, etc. So the fluid that's leaked out of the stratum spinosum will contain a lot of proteins. So the fluid will contain a lot of proteins. This increases osmotic pressure, and water is pulled into this fluid via osmosis. Cool. So I'm going to talk about something called appendages of the skin. What's an appendage? Is something attached to something larger. Chilling, yeah? So here's a few examples of appendages to the skin. There's 3 main appendages to the skin. Hair follicles. Each hair follicles, here's our hair follicle. Damn, amazing picture, innit? Damn. Hair follicle. Each has an erector pili muscle which controls the angle of the hair. So there is an erector pili muscle here, something like that, and it will control the angle of the hair. Number 2 is sweat glands. So as we can see here, there's 2 types of sweat glands. Sweat glands are in the yellow. 2 types of sweat glands. What are these 2 types? Ecrine, all over the body. Here's our ecrine, all over the body, and apocrine, which is in the smelly areas like our armpits and groin. So these ones, apocrine, these are the nasty ones in the armpits and in groin. Ecrine, all over the body. And then we have something called sebacous gland. Sebacous gland, cool. It secretes something called sebum, which is an oily fluid that lubricates the skin and hair. These are holocrine glands. Holocrine glands. Now I'm going to come on to something that's important also. Just an important thing. Sweat glands. What does it secrete? Obviously, secreting some sweatness. That's what it's secreting. Wow, bad focus. Anyway, there's different types of glands in our body. Merocrine. These are released via exocytosis. And so merocrine released via exocytosis. An example is an ecrine gland, as we saw up there. Here's our ecrine gland. Okay, another example is our apocrine, which pinches off bits of its plasma membrane. Okay, so apocrine pinches bits off, or pinches bits off of its plasma membrane. And next is our holocrine. Holocrine is like mad one. It blows up. Or cytoplasm ruptures. So mecrine released via exocytosis. Apocrine pinches off bits of itself, or it pinches off bits of its plasma membrane. Holocrine, it blows up, or the cytoplasm ruptures. Okay. There is an appendage which I missed, which is very important, and there's these things called nails. Some dirty nails, yeah. Nails are also an appendage. They're made of hard keratin. They're all brick and no mortar, so not really. So we gave that example before, how keratin is our bricks and our lipids is our mortar. These are all keratin, all bricks. Cool. Now I'm going to put some quick things here. What are goose pimples? Goose pimples are the contraction of erector pili muscles, which causes hair to erect and traps a layer of air, which is an insulator. What is an antiperspirant? It's a chemical that clogs apocrine sweat glands and kills bacteria that gives bad smells. So antiperspirant is a chemical that clogs apocrine sweat glands and kills bacteria that give bad smells. Deodorant, on the other hand, it just gives a nice smell. Yeah? Okay, we're going to move quickly on to vasculature, whatever. Anyway, so, vasculature. Blood supply arises from the subcutaneous tissue, where it divides into a deep dermal plexus. So, blood supply arises from subcutaneous tissue. Blood flow arises from subcutaneous tissue. Let's zoom out. Blood arises. Where's my pencil? Blood arises from subcutaneous tissue. Yeah? And there's artery and vein. Blood arises from subcutaneous tissue, where it divides into the deep dermal plexus. divides into our deep dermal plexus and our superficial dermal